So today we're going to talk a little bit about key features of a graph. So there's going to be 10 key features that you need to know, and we're going to start with two of the basic ones being the x and y intercepts. So the x-intercept is going to be anywhere that a graph crosses the x-axis. So remember, the x-axis is the horizontal axis and the y-axis is the vertical axis. So where the graph crosses the x-axis is right here at -4, at 2, at 4, and at 6. So you're going to want to write each of those as points on the graph. And so whenever you're writing the points, remember you write the x coordinate and then the y coordinate. So it'll be a point x comma y. So the first one, the x is -4, the y is 0. The second one is at 2, 0. The third one is at 4, 0. And the last one is at 6, 0. So those are going to be all of your x-intercepts. And so then going on from there, we're going to look at our y-intercepts. So that's where the graph crosses this axis, this vertical axis, and it only hits the axis one time right here at that 6. So you're going to write that as an xy coordinate again, and it's just going to be, since it doesn't move left or right, the x coordinate is going to be 0, and then it goes up 6, so the y coordinate is going to be 6. So that takes care of the x and y intercepts, and then we're going to move on to positive and negative intervals. So the positive interval is going to be anywhere that your graph is above this x-axis. So we're going to kind of cut the graph in half right here with the x-axis. And you're looking for anywhere that you have something graphed above it. So that's going to be this piece here and this, and then it dips back below the axis, so I'm not going to include that. And then we have one more little hill right here to include. So we need to be able to write that part of the graph somehow. We're going to write the interval. So to do that, we're going to want to use interval notation. So with interval notation, you're going to be going from an x to an x. So from the x to the next x in interval notation. Okay, so the first x that you see here, like the lower number that you see, is going to be right here at that -4. And so we're going from -4 to the next place that we want to pause. So we're going to start at -4 and start going across this graph. And then right here is where it dips below the axis again. So that's at 2. So we went from -4 to +2. So the way that you're going to want to write that is you're going to open up a parentheses, and you're starting with that lower number of -4, going to 2. And then you have that other little hill that you want to include too. So since you're including another interval, you're going to use the union symbol. And then it starts again where x equals 4. And it ends where x equals 6. So then we're including the interval from 4 to 6. So you would open up another parentheses, put a 4, 6, and close that parentheses. And with positive and negative, you're going to want to use parentheses instead of brackets, because when you're actually on the axis, that's when your y value is going to be 0. And since 0 is neither positive or a negative, you're going to use parentheses because on the axis, that point is not going to be included in the interval. So that's why I'm using the parentheses instead of the brackets in this. So then we're going to move on to the negative interval. So my negative interval, and I want you guys to pretend that there are arrows on the ends of these. There are supposed to be some arrows pointing down. So my negative interval, it's going to start all the way like where this arrow is. So if you remember yesterday, I said an arrow always goes off to infinity. Well, since this one's pointing towards the left-hand side of the graph, that is going to start at negative infinity. And so then it goes until it hits that point right there at -4. So then the next place that it becomes negative or below the x-axis again starts right here at 2 and goes up to 4, and then starts again at 6, and it goes on forever until it hits that positive infinity. So the way that you're going to want to write that, the way that I want you to think about it is you're going from negative infinity to x equals -4. And then you're going from x equals 2 to x equals 4, and from x equals 6 to infinity. So now we need to write that out. So we're going to start with a parentheses with that negative infinity. We're going from negative infinity to x equals -6 and closing our parentheses. Or it was -4. I'm sorry about that. Read that one wrong. So it's supposed to be from negative infinity to -4. So change that to a 4. And then we're going to want to do the union symbol to include our next interval. And we're going from 2 to 4. And then close that parentheses, union symbol again, because we're going from 6. And then because of that arrow right there, we're pointing off to the right. And then if it's an arrow pointing towards the right, that's representing positive infinity. And you would close your parentheses there. So that takes care of the negative interval, all of the red that I have shaded down here, that's below the x-axis. So next, and this one might be a little bit easier. I think you guys have seen these before. Next, we're going to do maximum and minimum. So a maximum, it's just a local high point, and so it's like a hill. So for the purposes of this class, we're going to be doing relative maximum and minimum. So I think in some other classes, you may have been using infinities as a max or min, but in this class, it's just going to be where there's like a hill for a maximum or a valley for a minimum. So on this graph, what I mean when I say hill is it means we were going up and then you turn around. So that point right there, and then it's just going to be a point, so it's not an interval for this one. So that point right there is going to be considered a maximum. So the first maximum that you have is at the point -2, 4. So you would write that down. And then you have another hill right here at 0, 6. And notice I'm not using the union symbols on these because they're just points. So you can make a note that these are points, not intervals. Sorry, I keep hitting the wrong buttons. Not intervals. And so then the next point that I have, the next hill, is going to be this point right here. So there's a little hill right there, and it's at the point 5, 3. So those 3 points are going to be your maximums. And then we need to look at minimums. So minimums are going to be essentially the same thing. It's like a low point where the graph was, where the graph was going down, and then it turns and goes up. So we have that little pivot point right there, and that's in a valley. And so that's going to be at the point -1, 3. And then there's another valley right here where it's going down and then it turns and goes back up, and that's at the point 3, -3. And then if you look on the graph, you don't see any more valleys on here. So that's going to take care of all of our relative maximums and minimums. So the next thing I want to talk about, it's going to be another interval. And for this one, and I'm going to go ahead and put my arrows on here. Okay, and for this one, it might be a little bit new to you guys. So for increasing, it's basically like if you're moving from left to right across this graph, it's when you're increasing when you're moving up. So if you literally put your pencil like on the graph, and let me use a highlighter. That might be a little easier. So if you put your pencil on the graph and you're moving from left to right, if you're going up like I am right now, then you're increasing. And then I'm going to stop right there because I would have to turn my pencil and start going back down. So then when you're going down, that's going to be considered when you're decreasing. So right here, I turn and I start going down. And then whenever I get to this valley right here, this minimum, that's when I start going up again. So that's increasing. So that piece right there is increasing. Then you have to turn again and you're going down. So from 0, 6 right there, you go down until you get to that minimum at 3, -3. And then you turn around again and you turn back up and you're increasing from 3, -3 until you get up to that maximum at 5, 3. And then it turns around one more time and you're decreasing until you get all the way to positive infinity. So now I just need to write out those intervals. So whenever you're doing interval notation with these, remember that you're writing from the x values. So this one, it's pointing off towards negative infinity. And you go on this axis right here until it changes to red, and it changes to red when x equals -2. So if you look at this kind of like a number line, like if I shade where it was green, then it would go from negative infinity to -2, and then it turns green again at -1 and goes to 0, and then turns green again at 3 and goes to 5. So that's just another way to look at it because you're just getting those x points. So for increasing, it's going to start at negative infinity, and then it goes until x equals -2. And then we're going to do a union, and we start again when x equals -1 and go until x equals 0. Start another union and go from when x equals 3 to when x equals 5. And that would be that interval. So remember to only use those x values whenever you're writing those intervals. And then let's switch it up and do the decreasing interval. So where it's going downhill is from -2 to -1, from 0 to 3, and then again from 5, and then we have the arrow on this one, and so that's going to point off to positive infinity. I know the arrow is pointing down, but since it's pointing towards the right-hand side of that number line, that's going to go off to positive infinity. So for the decreasing interval, the way that you would write it is you're going from x equals -2 to x equals -1, and then union, and then from x equals 0 to x equals 3, and then union, and then from x equals 5, and then it points off to the right, and so that's going to go all the way to positive infinity. So that would give you those increasing and decreasing intervals. So, and then again on this one, I only used parentheses. I didn't put any brackets in here because whenever you're actually sitting at the top of a hill like this, you're not really going up or down, you're just sitting at the top. So we're not going to include those in the intervals. We're just going to use parentheses for increasing and decreasing. So the last two are domain and range. So domain is going to be all of the possible x values, and range is going to be all of the possible y values. So with domain, it's basically anywhere that you have something on the graph as you're looking across the graph from left to right. So I'm just gonna come on here and I'm gonna like highlight the graph, and anywhere that I have something on the graph, so I start at negative infinity, and anywhere that I have something graphed for me, that's gonna be included in the domain. So since I never picked my pen up, I never had to change anything on there, that means I went all the way from negative infinity on the left-hand side of the graph to infinity on the right-hand side of the graph. So since there were no breaks in it and it didn't stop at any point from left to right, the domain is going to be from negative infinity to positive infinity. And so then the range is going to be a little bit different. The range is actually going to be using y values. So this is like the only thing that you're ever going to do that's going to use y values in interval notation. And so what we're going to do is you would basically start at the bottom of the graph. So starting somewhere down here. And as you can see, you have those arrows pointing down. So it's going down all the way to negative infinity on that y-axis. And so then you would start like moving up. And as long as there's something on the graph being hit as you're moving up, so like if I start moving up on this side of the graph, there's something that I'm hitting all the way up until I get right there to that 6. And then if I start on the other side of the graph, I'm still hitting something all the way up again until I get to that 6. So basically, as long as you're hitting something on the graph the whole way, then whenever you get to that highest point, that's where you're going to stop, and that's at y equals 6. So basically what I'm saying is there's nothing else graphed up here in this area. So that's why the range is going to stop whenever you hit that highest point. So once you hit the highest point, that's the end of the range. So the way that you would write that is, since it started all the way at the bottom of the graph, all the way down there at negative infinity, that's where you would start, is your range would start at negative infinity, and then it goes from that lowest point at the bottom to the highest point. So it's going to stop at the highest point, which is y equals 6. And then on this one, unlike the rest of the things that we've done, there is an actual point, a y value at 6. So that would be kind of like a closed circle since there's an actual value there. So you're going to end with a bracket. So just another way for you to think about these, if it helps. Basically, domain, it's going to be from the furthest left point to the furthest right point. And then your range is going to be your lowest point to your highest point. So that could be another way that you guys could think about domain and range. And then we're going to do a lot of practice on domain and range in class on Wednesday. And so we have a practice worksheet that we're going to do on that. But that is a summary of all of the key features. I know that this was a long video, so thank you for sticking with me. And we'll do some practice on some key features in class. Thanks, guys.